Let me ask you something. Right now, today, if you stopped working, just stopped, how long before your life falls apart? Like actually falling apart, rent unpaid, lights off, you're eating cereal for dinner, kind of falls apart. For most people, that answer is somewhere between 2 weeks and 60 days. That's the truth. Nobody wants to say out loud. And I'm going to say it because I've been on both sides of that line. And I know exactly what separates them. I grew up in Pittsburgh. My dad upholstered cars. We weren't poor, but we were close enough to poor that I understood what it felt like to count on every paycheck. I sold garbage bags door to door when I was 12, not because it was a cute entrepreneurial story to tell on a podcast someday, because I wanted money and I figured out the only way to get it was to go get it myself. That mentality never left me. But here's what took me years to really understand. Hustling harder is not the answer. Working more hours is not the answer. The answer is building things that work when you don't. That's what this is about. 7 categories of assets. The ones that the wealthiest people in the world actually use to build wealth that compounds while they sleep, while they travel, while they sit courtside watching a basketball game. I'm not talking about theory. I'm talking about how this actually works in practice. From someone who has built businesses from nothing, lost everything, built it back, and kept going. But before we get there, I need you to understand something fundamental. Because if you don't get this part, none of the rest of it will stick. You have been trained by school, by culture, by every system around you to think about money in exactly one way. You trade your time for it. You show up, you produce, you get paid. Simple, clean, and completely broken as a long-term strategy. Here's why. Your time is the one resource on earth that has an absolute non-negotiable ceiling. You get 24 hours a day. That's it. You can't borrow more. You can't manufacture more. You can't find a life hack that gives you a 25th hour, 24 hours. And most of those are already spoken for by sleep, by family, by the basic maintenance of being alive. Now look at your expenses. Rent goes up, healthcare goes up. Everything you need to survive costs more every single year. So you've got a fixed supply, your time, and a rising cost structure. Do the math on that. That equation only goes one direction, and it is not the direction you want. The only way out of that trap is to build income that doesn't require your time as an input. Income that runs on its own, assets that work while you sleep. I know some of you are already pushing back. You're thinking, that's easy to say when you've already made it. And I hear that. But I want to tell you, I started building my first real business with borrowed money, sleeping on the floor of a 3-bedroom apartment with 5 other people in Dallas, writing computer code I had taught myself from library books. There was no trust fund. There was no connected family. There was me and a credit card and an idea, and the absolute refusal to let the system keep me in a box. Everything I'm about to tell you, I figured out the hard way. You don't have to. Here's the first asset, business equity. And I don't mean this in some abstract buy shares in Apple kind of way, though. That's part of it. I mean this owning a piece of something that generates profit independent of your hourly presence is the single most powerful wealth building tool that exists. When I started Micro Solutions, I was selling computer services. I was working, grinding, doing everything myself. But the goal even then was to build something that was bigger than any one person's hours, something that could eventually run with or without me in the room. That's what equity means. It means you are building or buying a claim on the ongoing output of a productive enterprise. Think about what that looks like in practice. A business that earns a profit doesn't just earn it once, it earns it again and again, every month, every quarter, every year, as long as it keeps operating. And if you own equity in that business, whether it's your own company, a stake in a friend's startup, or shares in a publicly traded company, you are receiving a portion of that ongoing output without having to be physically present to generate it. That is the structural difference between the wealthy and everyone else. The wealthy own things. Everyone else rents out their time. Now, I need to be straight with you here because there's real risk in this category. Not every business succeeds. In fact, most don't. I've backed companies on Shark Tank that looked incredible on paper and fell apart in execution. I've made investments that went to zero, equity in bad businesses, in businesses with no competitive advantage, in businesses run by people who don't know what they're doing, that and is that an asset? That's a donation. The key is understanding what you're buying before you buy it. If you're starting your own business, know your customer, know your margins, know your competition. If you're buying equity in someone else's business, ask hard questions. Don't fall in love with the pitch, fall in love with the numbers. The second asset is real estate, and I'm going to be more specific than most people are when they talk about this. I'm not talking about buying your house and calling it an investment. So your primary residence is shelter. It might be appreciated, it might not, but it's not generating income. The real estate I'm talking about is property that other people pay you to use, rental property. And the only number that matters when you buy it is cash flow, is the rent you collect after the mortgage, after the taxes, after maintenance, after insurance, after every cost you can think of. Is there money left over? Not someday, not theoretically. Right now, for month one, if the answer is no, you do not have an asset, you have a liability. With better marketing, I've seen so many people get wrecked by real estate because they bought at the wrong price or in the wrong market, or with too much leverage because they were excited about the concept rather than disciplined about the math. The concept of real estate is sound. The execution of real estate will either make you or break you, depending entirely on whether you let your emotions or your spreadsheet make the decision. When you get it right, though, rental real estate is one of the most reliable wealth-building machines ever invented. Someone else pays your mortgage down. Someone else builds your equity. The property appreciates over time. You get tax advantages, and every month, after all the costs are covered, a check shows up in your account that you did nothing to earn that month. That's the machine working. The third asset is intellectual property. And this is the one I want you to think about hardest because it's the one most people disqualify themselves from before they even understand it. Every single one of you knows something that other people would pay to learn. Every single one. You have expertise, experience, insight, or skill that took you years to develop and that someone else would pay to shortcut. That's intellectual property. That's value you create once and sell infinitely. A book, a course, a method, a brand, a piece of software, a process, whatever it is. The economics of intellectual property are unlike anything else on this list. You build it once. The cost to deliver it to the next customer after the first is essentially zero. You can serve 10 people or 10 million people with the same asset. That's not leverage. That and a completely different kind of machine. I've watched people turn expertise in everything from restaurant management to tax prep to dog training into scalable digital products that generate 5 figures a month with zero additional input after the initial build. We live in a world right now where the cost of distribution is almost nothing. You can reach a global audience from a laptop in your apartment. The question isn't whether this is possible. The question is whether you're willing to do the work to build the thing. And yes, it takes work. I want to be honest about that. There's no version of this where you press a button and money appears. But the work you put in to build intellectual property pays you back on a fundamentally different schedule than hourly work. Hourly work pays you once per hour. Intellectual property can pay you thousands of times from a single hour of creation. That asymmetry is the whole game. The fourth asset is index funds. And I know they're coming from me, a guy who built his wealth through concentrated bets and aggressive moves. This might sound like a contradiction, but I'm going to tell you the truth about this, even if it doesn't fit the narrative. For most people, most of the time, the smartest investment they can make in the public markets is to buy a low-cost index fund and leave it alone. Not because it's the most exciting strategy, but because it works and almost everything else doesn't. Here's the reality. The vast majority of professional fund managers, people who do this full-time, who have research teams and Bloomberg terminals and decades of experience, the vast majority of them do not beat the market over a 10 or 20-year period, not most years, not on average. They don't beat it. So if the professionals with every advantage can't consistently beat the market, what makes any individual investor think they can do it while also holding down a job and raising a family and trying to live their life? The index fund says, I don't need to beat the market. I just need to own the market. And owning the market means owning a tiny piece of every significant company in the economy. When the economy grows, and over long enough time horizons, economies grow. You grow with it automatically. Without research, without analysis, without stress, you set up automatic contributions. You reinvest dividends, and you do not touch it when the market drops. Because the market dropping is not a crisis, it's a sale. And sales are opportunities to buy more, not reasons to panic. The compounding math here is so powerful it almost doesn't seem real until you actually run the numbers. $10,000 invested 30 years ago in a broad market index would be worth over $150,000 today. That's not from making brilliant picks. That's from doing nothing except not interfering with the process. If this is clicking for you, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button, because the next two assets we're about to cover are where I see people consistently leave the most money on the table, and I don't want you to miss it. The fifth asset is becoming the lender instead of the borrower. Let me paint you a picture that I want you to never forget. Right now, someone is paying interest on a credit card balance at 24% annually. Now, that interest payment goes to the bank. The bank uses a portion of those interest payments to compensate investors who deposited money with them. And those investors are earning a return on capital. They are not actively working to generate. One person is bleeding money, the other person is collecting it. The only structural difference between those two people is which side of the lending relationship they're on. Most people spend their entire lives as borrowers. Mortgages, car loans, credit cards, student debt, personal loans, they are constantly paying interest out the door. Compound interest is the most powerful force in personal finance, and most people experience it only as the enemy. The goal, not necessarily immediately, but over time, is to flip that relationship and to start positioning your capital on the lending side, high-yield savings accounts, bonds, private lending arrangements where you're providing capital to individuals or businesses secured by real assets. These are all versions of the same thing. You own capital, you rent it out, you collect interest, the borrower does the work, your money does the work, you benefit from both. I want to be clear that lending is not risk-free. Borrowers default, markets shift, interest rate environments change. You are capping your upside when you lend. You'll earn your agreed rate and nothing more, no matter how well the borrower does, but you're also putting a floor under your capital in a way that pure equity doesn't. This isn't a better than equity argument. It's a diversification argument. A mature financial infrastructure has both working simultaneously. The sixth asset is digital systems and infrastructure. And this is the one I get most excited about because we are living through a genuinely unprecedented moment in economic history. For the first time ever, a single person with a laptop and an internet connection can build a business infrastructure that serves thousands of customers simultaneously, processes payments automatically, delivers products digitally, and generates income around the clock without a single employee or a single square foot of office space. I came up before any of this existed when I started my first real business. You needed physical infrastructure for everything. Servers, offices, staff, phone systems. The barrier to building something was enormous. Today, the barrier is almost nothing. Today, a smart, motivated person with a specific skill set can build a digital system, a software product, an e-commerce operation, an automated content platform, a membership community, a monetized newsletter that generates real income with almost no ongoing operational requirement after the initial build. Let me be direct about the realistic picture here. These things don't build themselves. The first 6 months of building any digital system are usually hard, often unrewarding, and full of setbacks. I've watched people on Shark Tank pitch digital businesses, and the ones that succeed are never the ones with the flashiest idea. They're the ones who outworked everyone in the building phase and built something that actually solves a real problem. For a real audience, value first, revenue follows value. And that's the sequence. But when it works, When you build a digital system that's generating consistent income from an audience that trusts you, the economics are extraordinary. You're not trading hours for dollars. You're operating a machine that runs on its own internal logic. The internet doesn't close at night. Your digital product doesn't call in sick. Your automated email sequence doesn't need a lunch break. It just works. And while it's working, you can be doing anything else you want to do. The seventh asset is the one that underpins all the others, and most people blow right past it looking for something more exciting. It's you, your knowledge, your skills, your judgment, your ability to communicate and to compete and to see things that other people miss. Human capital, the compound interest of the mind. Here's something I figured out early that changed everything for me. Information is the most underpriced asset in the world. Books are $10, courses are a few $100s. The distilled wisdom of the most successful people in any field is available to anyone willing to actually go consume it. Most people don't. They watch TV, they scroll, they consume content that entertains but doesn't compound. I read constantly, not because I love reading for its own sake, and because knowledge compounds. Because every framework you add to your mental library makes the next framework easier to absorb. Because the person who understands business, psychology, technology, communication, and finance simultaneously sees opportunities that specialists in any single domain will miss completely. That edge, the ability to see across disciplines, to connect dots that others don't even know are in the same picture, that's worth more than any single investment. And here's the thing about investing in yourself that's different from every other asset on this list. It cannot be taken from you. Markets crash, properties flood, businesses fail. But what you know, what you can do, how you think, nobody can crash that. Nobody can inflate it away. Nobody can take it in a lawsuit or a market correction. It is the only truly permanent asset any human being can hold. Everything else you build flows from it. Now let me give you the sequence because the order matters and most people get this wrong. They hear a list like this and they try to do all 7 things at once and they end up doing none of them well. Let me give you the actual order. Step 1, stop bleeding. If you have high interest debt, that is a guaranteed negative return on your money. Pay it off with the same urgency you'd bring to an emergency because it is one. Then build your buffer 3 to 6 months of living expenses in a high yield savings account, not because it's a great investment, but because without it, every financial decision you make will be made under pressure, and stress and pressure and stress make people stupid. The buffer is cognitive insurance. Step 2, start investing in yourself immediately and never stop. This runs parallel to everything else for the rest of your life. Read, learn, develop expertise, build the mental infrastructure. Step 3, once the debt is cleared and the buffer is built, start automatic contributions to a low-cost index fund. Set it, automate it, do not touch it. Treat it like a bill you just have to pay every month. Step 4, build one thing, one digital asset or intellectual property project, not 5 ideas you're exploring. 1, pick the overlap between what you know and what the market needs. Build the simplest version of it, put it in front of real people, get real feedback, improve it. This step is about learning to create income that doesn't depend on your hours. It's a skill you have to develop by doing it. Step 5, real estate, but only when the math works. Not when you feel ready, not when the market looks good. When you have found a specific property that cash flows from day one, that's the only trigger. Patience here is not a weakness, it's discipline. Step 6, lending and more complex structures. As your knowledge deepens and your financial base grows, you add complexity. But complexity built on a weak foundation is just expensive chaos. Get the earlier stages produced before you add layers. I want to close by telling you why any of this actually matters, because it's not the money. I know that sounds like something a rich person says, but hear me out. I've competed my whole life. I competed in business. I competed in the markets. I competed on a basketball court with guys who would have destroyed me if I wasn't so stubborn about not losing. That competitive fire is real, but what I was always actually competing for wasn't the number in the account. It was the freedom that number represented, the freedom to bet on myself, the freedom to say no to things that don't align with what I value, the freedom to take a year and pour everything into an idea that most people think is crazy, the freedom to show up for my family as a full person, not as someone depleted by financial desperation. That's what the assets are actually building, not a score, a life that you designed on your own terms. There is a specific day that I want you to imagine. It's not a big dramatic moment. There's no ceremony, but it's the most important financial day of your life. It's the day your passive income, the income from your assets, your equity, your real estate, your systems exceeds your basic expenses on that day. The math of your entire life shifts. You are no longer working because you have to. You are choosing. Every single day after that, you are choosing. And that choice, that freedom, that ability to show up to your own life as someone who opted in rather than someone who had no other option. That is what being wealthy actually means. It doesn't require being a billionaire. It requires crossing one threshold. And that threshold is not as far away as you think. Not if you start now. Not if you're honest about where you are. Disciplined about the sequence, patient with the compounding, and ruthless about protecting the process. The door isn't locked. It never was. The only question is whether you're willing to walk through it, get after it,